The chains were cold against her wrists. Yuna could feel them digging into her skin as the guards dragged her across the metal floor. She was only 17 years old. Her crime was teaching children how to read poetry from old Earth. For this, the Galactic Council had sentenced her to death. The execution chamber was massive. It was built like an arena, with tall walls of black stone and a ceiling that opened to show the stars above. Thousands of alien creatures sat in the viewing platforms, watching her with eyes that held no mercy. Some had scales. Some had too many arms. Some had faces she could not understand. But all of them looked at her like she was nothing more than an insect waiting to be crushed. The broadcast drones floated around her, capturing every moment. This execution would be shown across 4,000 star systems. Every human colony would be forced to watch. The Council wanted them to see what happened to those who dared to resist. Yuna tried to stand tall, but her legs were weak. They had not fed her in 3 days. They had beaten her twice, but she refused to cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her tears. The council speaker stepped forward. It was a creature called a Vethari, standing nearly 3 meters tall with a body covered in hard shell and compound eyes that reflected the light like broken glass. Its voice was cold and mechanical when it spoke. Humanity has proven itself to be a disease in this galaxy, the speaker said. For 60 years, we have tried to civilize your species. We have given you homes on distant worlds. We have allowed you to serve the greater civilizations. And how do you repay us? With rebellion, with dangerous ideas, with poetry that speaks of freedom and hope. The crowd made sounds of approval. Yuna heard clicking and hissing from dozens of alien throats. This human child, the speaker continued, pointing one long arm at Yuna, has spread forbidden knowledge to the young ones of her colony. She has planted seeds of resistance in their minds. Today, we will show the galaxy what happens to those seeds. The execution platform rose from the floor. It was a simple device, a metal circle with restraints for the arms and legs. Above it hung the beam emitter, a weapon that would vaporize her body in a single flash of light. Quick, clean, final, Yuna was pushed onto the platform. The restraints locked around her limbs automatically. She could not move. She could only watch as the beam emitter began to glow with gathering energy, far away, at the edge of a region called Contested Space. Admiral Tay Kang received the broadcast on his personal screen. He was aboard the UEN Silent Fury, a warship that officially did not exist. For 3 years, he had been hiding with a fleet of human vessels, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had not expected that moment to come like this. Tay watched the screen with eyes that grew darker with each passing second. The girl on the platform was his niece, his sister's only child. The last time he had seen Yuna, she was 12 years old, laughing as she chased birds through the fields of their home colony. Now she was in chains, about to die for teaching children to dream. His hands began to shake, not from fear, from a rage so deep it felt like fire burning through his blood. "Admiral," his first officer said quietly, "what are your orders?" Tay did not answer immediately. He watched as the beam emitter charged to full power. He watched as the council speaker raised its arm, ready to give the final command. He watched as his niece closed her eyes and prepared to die. Then he opened a communication channel, not to one ship, not to 10 ships, to every human vessel hidden across the galaxy. 847 warships that the alien species believed had been destroyed years ago. "This is Admiral Tay Kang," he said, his voice steady and cold. "They have taken one of our daughters. All ships, execute Protocol Ember immediately. No mercy, no negotiation. We bring them all home, or we burn it all down." Across the stars, human captains received the message. Some were hiding in asteroid fields. Some were disguised as cargo haulers. Some were buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons. All of them had been waiting. All of them had been preparing. Now they moved. On the council station, Gina O heard the Admiral's message through her hidden earpiece. She was a human engineer who had spent 4 years working in the station's maintenance section. The aliens thought she was just another obedient servant. They did not know that she had been placed here for exactly this moment. Gina moved quickly through the service corridors. She knew every wire, every power conduit, every weakness in the station's systems. She had studied them for years. Now she would use that knowledge. The execution beam needed massive amounts of power to function. That power came from a central distribution node buried deep in the station's core. Gina reached the node and pulled out a small device from her pocket. It was simple but effective. A localized electromagnetic pulse that would disrupt the power flow for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds was all humanity needed. She pressed the button in the execution chamber. The beam emitter flickered. The gathered aliens made confused sounds. The council speaker looked up at the weapon with something like uncertainty in its compound eyes. "What is happening?" the speaker demanded. The technicians scrambled to understand. Error messages flashed across their screens. The beam emitter powered down, then tried to restart, then failed again. Yuna opened her eyes. She was still alive. She did not understand why, but she was still alive. The speaker grew angry. "Execute her manually," it commanded. "Send guards. Use blades if you must." Guards began moving toward the platform. Yuna watched them approach with weapons drawn. She had been given a few extra seconds of life, but it seemed those seconds would end soon. Then the first explosion shook the station. The crowd screamed. Alarms began to wail. Through the open ceiling, Yuna could see flashes of light in the darkness of space. Ships were fighting. Human ships. Her people had come for her. The first minute felt like an hour. Yuna watched the guards approach her through the chaos of the screaming crowd. They were tall creatures with grey skin and 4 arms, each holding a curved blade that glowed with energy. They did not care about the explosions outside. They had their orders. The station shook again. Pieces of the ceiling began to fall. One of the massive broadcast drones crashed into the viewing platform, crushing several aliens beneath it. But still, the guards came closer. Yuna pulled against her restraints. The metal cut into her wrists, drawing blood, but she did not stop. She would not die lying down. She would fight until her last breath. Outside the station, Captain Wu Xin stood on the bridge of his ship, the Unbroken. It was not the biggest human vessel, but it was fast, and its crew was loyal. Wu had been waiting 3 years for this day. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of watching his people suffer under alien rule. Now the waiting was over. "All weapons free," Wu commanded. "Target their defense platforms. Open a path to the main hangar." The Unbroken's guns roared to life. Beams of light cut through the darkness, destroying the station's outer defenses one by one. Behind Wu, dozens of other human ships joined the attack. They moved like a swarm, coordinated and deadly. The Council's defense fleet tried to respond. They had powerful ships, ancient weapons, technology that humans had never been allowed to touch. But they were slow. They were not prepared. They had grown comfortable in their belief that humanity was broken. They were wrong. Wu opened a broadcast channel. He wanted the entire galaxy to hear his words. "You wanted to show everyone how you kill a human girl," he said, his voice calm and cold. "Now watch how humans respond when you touch one of our children." Back inside the station, the guards had reached Yuna's platform. The first one raised its blade, ready to bring it down on her neck. She closed her eyes. The blade never fell. A shot rang out from somewhere above. The guard stumbled backward, a smoking hole in its chest. Then another shot, and another. Bodies began to fall around the platform. Yuna looked up. A human woman was moving across the upper walkways, a rifle in her hands. She fired with perfect accuracy, dropping guards with each shot. Her face was focused, determined, without any trace of fear. This was Commander Bora. Numb, she led the strike team that had boarded the station through a maintenance hatch, while the battle raged outside. Her mission was simple: reach the girl, keep her alive, and get her out. Move. Bora shouted to her team. Clear a path to the platform. Her soldiers poured into the chamber from multiple entrances. They were outnumbered, but they were fighting for something the aliens could not understand. They were fighting for family. The council speaker tried to flee. It pushed through the panicking crowd, its compound eyes scanning for an escape route. But there was no escape. Human soldiers blocked every exit. The speaker found itself surrounded. "You cannot do this," it hissed. "We are the council. We rule this galaxy." One of the soldiers smiled. It was not a kind smile. Not anymore. 20 minutes into the attack, Admiral Tay's flagship arrived. The Silent Fury was massive, a warship built in secret on a hidden moon at the edge of known space. It had taken 10 years to construct. Its weapons could crack the shells of planets, and now it turned those weapons on the council station. "Admiral," his first officer reported, "Commander Nam has secured the execution chamber. The target is alive." Tay let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. Yuna was alive. His niece was alive. But the mission was not over. "Prepare boarding teams," Tay ordered. "I am going in personally." His officers looked at him with surprise. Admirals did not lead boarding actions. It was too dangerous. Tay did not care. "She is my blood," he said simply. "I will bring her home with my own hands." The Silent Fury tore through the station's hull like a knife through paper. Metal screamed and atmosphere rushed out into space. Emergency barriers slammed down, but they could not stop the human assault. Tay led his team through the breach, moving through smoke and fire toward the execution chamber. They met resistance. Council guards threw themselves at the humans with desperate fury. Energy blasts filled the corridors. Bodies fell on both sides. But the humans pushed forward. Nothing could stop them now. Tay reached the chamber just as the last council guard fell. He stepped over the bodies and walked toward the platform where his niece still hung in chains. Yuna looked up. Her face was bruised. Her eyes were tired. But when she saw him, something like hope flickered in her expression. "Uncle," she whispered. Tay cut through her restraints with a single motion. He caught her as she fell forward, too weak to stand on her own. She was so light in his arms, so fragile. The thought of what they had almost done to her made his rage burn hotter. "I told you," he said quietly, holding her close. "We never leave our own behind." The broadcast drones were still recording. Across 4,000 star systems, humans and aliens alike watched as Admiral Tai Kong lifted the condemned girl in his arms and carried her to safety. The Council had wanted to show the galaxy the death of human hope. Instead, they had shown the galaxy something far more dangerous. They had shown what happens when humanity decides to stop hiding. 20-7 minutes. That was all it had taken. 27 minutes to rescue one girl and shake the foundations of galactic power. But this was only the beginning. The Council station was broken. Fires burned in 100 compartments. Bodies floated in the sections open to space. The alien guards who had survived the attack knelt on the floor with their hands behind their heads, surrounded by human soldiers who felt no desire for mercy. Admiral Tai carried Yuna to the medical bay that his team had set up in a secured section of the station. Human doctors rushed forward to take her, their faces tight with concern. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and covered in bruises from her time in Council custody. But she would survive. That was more than the Council could say about its power. The 12 members of the High Council had been captured alive. This was not an accident. Admiral Tai had given specific orders. Death was too easy. He wanted them to witness what came next. They were brought to the execution chamber, the same room where they had planned to kill Yuna. Now they stood in chains, surrounded by the humans they had dismissed as inferior for 60 years. The broadcast drones still floated overhead, still recording, still transmitting to every corner of the galaxy. Tai stepped in front of the captured council members. He looked at each of them in turn. The Vetheri speaker, the scaled creatures from the Dominion of Scales, the tall, thin beings from the Merchant Collective. All of them had voted for humanity's subjugation. All of them had called his people vermin. Now they would listen. For 60 years, Tai began, his voice carrying across the chamber and across the stars. You called us animals. You burned our colonies. You took our children and sold them as servants. You forced us to work in your mines, your factories, your ships. When we asked for freedom, you laughed. When we asked for mercy, you responded with chains. He paused, letting his words sink in. You thought we accepted this. You thought we were broken. You thought that after all your cruelty, we had simply given up hope. The council speaker tried to speak. You do not understand the order of things. Humanity is a young species. You need guidance. You need control. Without us, you would destroy yourselves. Tai smiled. It was a cold smile, empty of any warmth. You speak of order. Let me tell you about order. He gestured toward the damaged walls, the fallen guards, the human soldiers standing proud and armed. For 20 years, we have been building, hiding, preparing. You destroyed our fleet at Orion, or so you believed. In truth, we moved our ships to places you would never think to look. We hid them in asteroid fields, inside hollow moons, beneath the surfaces of dead worlds. We've built more ships in secret shipyards scattered across the galaxy. We trained soldiers in hidden camps on planets you had marked as uninhabitable. The council members began to look afraid. This was not the cowering humanity they had expected. You watched us, Tai continued. You monitored our communications. You controlled our travel. But you never saw what we were really doing. because you never believed we were capable of planning. You saw us as simple creatures, driven by emotion, unable to think beyond the present moment. He stepped closer to the speaker. That was your mistake. At that moment, Una appeared at the entrance to the chamber. She was leaning on Commander Bora for support, a blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and determined. She had insisted on being there for this moment. Tay looked at her with pride and pain mixed together in his expression. Then he turned back to the council. This girl taught children to read poetry. She shared words about hope, about courage, about the human spirit. For this, you sentenced her to death. You wanted to use her execution as a message to all humans across the galaxy. He straightened his shoulders. Congratulations. You have sent a message. But it is not the message you intended. He looked directly into the nearest broadcast drone, speaking to every human in every colony, on every ship, in every mine and factory across the stars. My brothers and sisters, you have seen what they tried to do. You have seen how they treat our children. And now you have seen that we are not powerless. We have ships. We have soldiers. We have weapons. But most importantly, we have something they never understood. His voice grew stronger. We have each other. We are humanity. We do not forget those who harm us. We do not abandon those who need us. And we do not break, no matter how hard they try to crush us. Across the galaxy, humans were watching. Slaves in alien households, workers in processing plants, servants in noble estates, children in dormitories, old and young, weak and strong. All of them heard the Admiral's words, and all of them began to hope. On a mining colony called Krath 7, a man named Day Lim put down his tools and looked at the screen showing the broadcast. He had worked in the mines for 15 years. His back was scarred from alien whips. His hands were rough and broken from endless labor. But in that moment, something changed inside him. He turned to the other miners around him. They were all humans, all watching the same broadcast, all feeling the same fire growing in their hearts. You heard the Admiral, Day said quietly. Protocol Ember. The miners looked at each other. Then, slowly, they began to smile. The rebellion was not starting. It had already begun years ago. The council had simply been too blind to see it. Now, there was no more hiding, no more waiting. The time for patience was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. The galaxy burned. Not with fire, but with revolution. Within hours of Admiral Tay's broadcast, human uprisings erupted on 37 worlds. Then 50. Then 100. The Council's carefully maintained order began to collapse like a house built on sand. On Krath 7, Dalim led 3,000 miners against their alien overseers. They had no real weapons at first, only mining tools and their own hands. But they had numbers, and they had rage built from years of suffering. The guards at the main processing facility never saw them coming. They had grown lazy over the years, convinced that humans were too broken to fight back. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Day himself reached the planetary communication tower. His hands were bloody, his body was tired, but his spirit was stronger than it had ever been. He activated the broadcast system and spoke into the microphone. "This is Krath 7. We are free." Those 3 words traveled across space at the speed of light. They reached other colonies, other mines, other prisons where humans waited for a sign. And when they heard those words, They knew the time had come. On the luxury world of Vera Prime, human servants who had spent their lives serving alien nobles revealed their true purpose. They had been placed there years ago by a woman named Hannah Yu, a diplomat who had pretended to cooperate with the Council while secretly building a network of resistance cells across the galaxy. Hannah was aboard, the silent fury now, standing beside Admiral Tay as reports of victories poured in from every corner of known space. Her face was calm, but inside she felt a satisfaction deeper than words could express. 20 years, she said quietly. 20 years of smiling at creatures who treated us like animals. 20 years of pretending to be their obedient servant while planting seeds of rebellion in every place they thought was safe. Tay looked at her with respect. You did what the rest of us could not. You waited. Patience is a weapon they never understood, Hannah replied. They think in terms of individual lifetimes. We think in terms of generations. Our children's children would have continued this fight if we had failed. But we did not fail. Across the galaxy, other species began to take notice. Not all aliens supported the Council. Many had been forced into cooperation through threats and violence. Now, watching humanity rise, they began to wonder if change was possible. The Korvathi, a species of small, furred creatures who had been conquered centuries ago, reached out to the human fleet. They offered supplies, safe harbors, and information about Council weaknesses. They were not alone. One by one, other subjugated species began to contact Admiral Tay. They smelled blood in the water, Captain Wu observed. The Council's grip is loosening. Good, Tay replied. Let them see that the old order is ending. Let them choose their side. Back on the Council station, Yuna was recovering quickly. The human doctors had given her food, medicine, and most importantly, hope. She spent her waking hours helping where she could, talking to wounded soldiers, thanking those who had risked everything to save her. Commander Bora stayed close to her. The two women had formed a bond during the chaos of the rescue. Bora had lost her own family to Council violence years ago. Protecting Yuna felt like a second chance, a way to save someone when she had failed before. Why did they hate us so much? Yuna asked one evening, looking out at the stars through a damaged window. We never threatened them. We only wanted to live in peace. Bora considered the question. Fear, she said finally. They looked at humanity and saw something that frightened them. We grow fast. We adapt. We never stop dreaming of something better. For creatures who have ruled for thousands of years, that kind of energy is terrifying. So they tried to crush us. Yes, but they failed to understand that you cannot crush hope. You can push it down, hide it, pretend it does not exist. But it always returns. Always. The Council's remaining forces tried to mount a counterattack. They gathered their scattered fleets and struck at a human supply line near the Merchant Collective's territory. For a moment, it seemed like they might win a small victory. Then the rest of humanity's hidden fleet arrived. Ships that had been dormant for years emerged from their hiding places. They came from asteroid belts and abandoned stations and the dark spaces between stars. They came in numbers that the Council had never imagined possible. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Council's counterattack force was destroyed. Not defeated, destroyed. The few survivors were allowed to flee, carrying news of the defeat back to their leaders. Let them run, Admiral Tay ordered. Let them tell everyone what happens when you face a united humanity on Earth, which had been occupied by Council forces for 40 years. The news of the uprising reached the resistance fighters hiding in the old cities. A woman named Sora Park, Yuna's grandmother, listened to the broadcast with tears running down her weathered face. Her granddaughter was alive. Her people were rising. The nightmare that had lasted for generations was finally ending. She gathered the other resistance members around her. They were few in number, old and weak compared to their alien occupiers. But they had survived this long. They could survive a little longer. Our children have done what we could not, Sora said. Now we must do our part. When the fleet comes to liberate Earth, they must find us ready. The others nodded. They began to prepare. Across the galaxy, humanity was waking up, and the universe would never be the same. 1 year had passed since the day the galaxy turned. Yuna Park stood on a stage built in the ruins of what had once been the Council's greatest symbol of power. The execution chamber had been torn down, brick by brick, beam by beam. In its place, a memorial had been constructed. Simple stone pillars stood in a circle, each one carved with the names of humans who had died under Council rule. There were millions of names. It had taken teams of workers 6 months just to finish the carving. Around the memorial, a crowd of millions had gathered. Humans stood shoulder to shoulder with Korvathi, with Vendi, with a dozen other species who had joined the rebellion against their former masters. They had come from across the galaxy to witness this moment. The first anniversary of humanity's rising. Yuna wore simple clothes, nothing fancy or official. She had refused all attempts to make her look like a symbol or a hero. She was just a girl who had taught children to read poetry. That was all she had ever wanted to be, but the galaxy saw her differently now. 1 year ago, she began. Her voice carried by speakers to every corner of the gathering and broadcast to every star system. I stood in this place waiting to die. The Council wanted to use my death as a message. They wanted to show humanity that hope was useless, that resistance was foolish, that we should accept our place as servants forever. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. They were wrong. A wave of sound rose from the crowd. Cheers, shouts, tears of joy and sorrow mixed together. I did not survive because I was strong or brave or special, Yuna continued. I survived because of the people who came for me. Admiral Tae Kong, who refused to abandon his family. Gina Oh, who spent years waiting for the right moment to act. Captain Wu Xin, who flew his ship into fire without hesitation. Commander Bora Nam, who led soldiers into impossible odds. De Lim, who turned miners into warriors. Hannah Yoon, who built a revolution in silence and shadows. She named them one by one, and as she spoke each name, the person stepped forward from the crowd to stand near the stage. They were the architects of humanity's resurrection. They were heroes. But it was not just these people, Yuna said. It was every human who kept hope alive in their heart during the darkest years. Every parent who whispered old Earth stories to their children. Every worker who refused to let their spirit break. Every prisoner who dreamed of freedom. You are all heroes. Every single one of you. In the crowd, Yuna's grandmother, Sora, stood with tears streaming down her face. Earth had been liberated 3 months ago. The old woman had lived to see her home free again. She had lived to embrace her granddaughter one more time. Admiral Tae watched from the edge of the stage. He was now Fleet Marshal of the United Earth Alliance, the governing body that had formed from the chaos of revolution. The title meant little to him. What mattered was that his people were free. What mattered was that Yuna was alive and safe. The council species had been given a choice after their defeat. They could join the new galactic commonwealth as equals, respecting the rights of all species, or they could face isolation from galactic trade and communication. Most had chosen peace. The Vetheri speaker, the same creature who had ordered Yuna's execution, had been tried for crimes against humanity. It now lived in a prison on a cold moon, surrounded by the silence it had once tried to impose on others. Those council species who refused to accept the new order had retreated to their home systems. They still hated humanity. They still dreamed of returning to power. But they were afraid now. They had learned what happened when humanity decided to stop being patient. Yuna reached the final part of her speech. They tried to kill me because I believed words had power, she said. They were right. Words do have power. A single poem can plant a seed of hope that grows for generations. A single story can remind people that they are not alone. A single voice can shake the foundations of empires. She straightened her shoulders, no longer the thin, frightened girl who had been dragged to execution. But words alone are not enough. Words must be followed by action. Hope must be followed by courage. Dreams must be followed by sacrifice. We have proven this. We have shown the galaxy what humanity can do when we stand together. She raised her voice for the final words. So let this be our message to the universe. We are humanity. We came from a small blue world at the edge of nowhere. We were conquered, enslaved, and nearly destroyed. But we survived. We rose. And we will never bow again. The crowd erupted. The sound was like thunder rolling across mountains. Yuna stepped back from the microphone. Tay moved forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. Your mother would be proud, he said quietly. Yuna's mother had died in a council labor camp when Yuna was 8 years old. The memory still hurt. It would always hurt, but the pain was different now. It was not the pain of helplessness. It was the pain of love remembered. I know, Yuna replied. As the celebration continued around them, the humans and their allies looked up at the stars. Once, those stars had seemed like prison walls, keeping humanity trapped under alien rule. Now they were doorways to a future that belonged to everyone. The old order was gone. The new dawn had arrived, and somewhere in the depths of space, other young species watched and listened. They saw what humanity had accomplished. They heard the message of hope and resistance. And in their hearts, new seeds were planted. The galaxy had changed forever. Not because of weapons, or fleets, or battles. Because one girl had dared to teach. Children poetry, and the universe had finally listened.